The name of the panel is Resistance and Renewal, Unions and Public Opinion in the Crisis Economy. We've all lived through in the last 20, 30 years, I guess you can argue about the time frame, the global shift to the right, the increasing power of corporations, what Naomi Klein refers to as disaster capitalism, the crisis economy, and that shift has included, I would argue, a substantial attack on unions. We've seen unions demonized, we've seen declining union density, and I think many of us in this room, certainly I have, been engaged, and people on this panel have been engaged in the fight back against that and trying to shift that narrative. On the other hand, we see Occupy Wall Street, we see clear signs of resistance and an understanding that that global control of corporations and right-wing governments has created increasing inequality, and the central message of Occupy Wall Street. So it's an interesting time we live in, a very exciting one, I think, and I'm delighted to be here to hear what our panelists have to say about that. So I'll introduce the three of them, and then we'll start here with Vincent and move along the panel. Vincent Mosco is a Professor Emeritus of Sociology at Queen's University. He was Canada's Research Chair in Communications and Society and a member of the Faculty Union Executive. He's written a number of books, one called Labor, the Working Class and the Media, which he wrote with Janet Wasko in 1983. His most recent book is called Getting the Message, Communication Workers and Global Value Chains. And he wrote that with Ursula Huws and Catherine McKercher in 2010. Next on the panel is Lorene Oikawa. Lorene is the first Asian Canadian Vice President of the BC Government and Service Employees Union, the BCGEU. She was re-elected for her third term just this past convention in 2011. BCGEU, for those of you who may not know, represent workers who work in direct provincial government in a variety of sectors, including community health, community social services, childcare, post-secondary institutions, hotels, and the Canada Line. Lorene has authored articles on a range of topics, including healthcare, poverty, human rights, and many other topics. Mike Old, the third of the panelists, is the Communications Director for the 43,000-member Hospital Employees Union. He helped the union launch www.heu.org in 1998 and has survived 3 subsequent overhauls of the website. Mike has also worked for CUPE and ACTRA and as a freelancer. He's interested in how unions can use social media to engage members. So we'll start with you, Vincent. Each panelist has 15 minutes. I don't know whether we'll have time for questions at the end, but we may have time for a couple of points of discussion. Vincent.
Labor has been an important component of all of the movements for media democracy. From the earliest days of printers' unions, the printers who spread literacy through their own publications, down through to the present. I've had the privilege of working with unions over the last 30 years in a variety of campaigns. The first of which was the machinists and aerospace workers in the United States, who put together the first media monitoring study conducted in the United States, and which was published in 1983. It demonstrated that workers were by and large ignored in the media. Unfortunately, that's still the case. After all, if the media didn't ignore workers, we would know that up to a third of the growth in income inequality in North America can be explained by the decline of trade unions. That came out of a study from Harvard over the past summer. Anybody here know if the media reported on this? Just a couple of weeks ago, StatsCan reported that even when we control for skill and occupation, up to 10% of the wage gap that we can see between union and non-union members can be explained simply by membership in a trade union. You earn 10% more simply by being part of the labor movement. If the media were covering labor, we'd all know that. Now, I have the benefit of being a researcher who studies labor, so I know a lot about these developments. But most people don't. If they did, if the media did cover trade unions and the labor movement as it should, we'd know that there's been a remarkable upsurge in labor organizing in North America and around the world. We'd know first that freelancers, bloggers, and IT workers are coming together in traditional and new forms of trade unionism. I've observed it firsthand in the US, in Canada, and in India. If the media covered labor, we'd know that North America would now have two large information society unions. Unions that cover workers in printing, in broadcasting, in telecommunication, and information technology, and have made really good use of bringing workers together across the media industries. That would be here, the Communication, Energy, and Paper Workers Union, and in the United States, the Communication Workers of America. These two unions are central to the labor movement in their own countries and worldwide. I've seen the Communication Workers of America organizing call center workers in India, building global solidarity. But most people don't know that because media doesn't cover labor. If media covered labor, in fact, they would teach us about the upsurge in labor activism in Asia, especially in India and China. I've observed firsthand in Delhi the formation of the first genuinely independent federation of Indian unions, the New Trade Union Initiative, which is mobilizing workers across all sectors, but especially in the communication and information industries. An offshoot of NTUI is a group called Unites, appropriately titled because Unites in India is bringing together workers in the call center industries with those in the IT and computer software engineering industries. India is not just about an allegedly booming economy of happy workers joining the middle class. It's about workers who are being exploited at all levels, from call centers to high-tech companies. But it's also about how they are coming together now to unite in a burgeoning labor movement in that country. And we can say the same for China, where most of our IT equipment is put together, is produced, and where exploitation beyond what anyone in the Industrial Revolution experienced can be observed all over the country, but especially in the south of China. Why would Foxconn put up nets on the upper floors of its factory if it didn't have rampaging suicides among its workers? Workers have been known to work 36-hour shifts in Apple plants when their company presses demand after demand to get out product. But if the media covered labor, we'd know that labor is organizing in China, using official unions and underground unions, using new media like the QQ system of instant messaging. When you happen to hear about workers leaving striking plants in China, these are not sudden eruptions. These are organized, militant actions by workers who are in contact with one another and with their brothers and sisters in Hong Kong and Taiwan, using their technologies, networks, their demands to build a labor movement in China. I've seen it happening in Shanghai, in Shenzhen, and in other parts of the country. If the media covered labor adequately, we'd know that there is now an international federation of media and information technology workers, the Union Network International, a federation that represents workers in most every nation in the world and is building global solidarity among media workers, cultural workers, call center workers, and IT workers. It's established framework agreements to bargain, and bargain fiercely, with transnational corporations, Telefonica, Quebecor, and a number of others, to establish multinational labor agreements, something that will be essential for labor in the future. UNI has also established a call center charter and used it to effectively raise the standards of labor and of living in offshore plants in India. If the media covered labor, we'd know all of this, and you wouldn't have to hear it from me. But it doesn't, and that's unfortunate. But we together can work on that. I want to echo Judy's point about the Occupy movement, because this perhaps for all of us, but especially for labor, is a singular movement in the history of labor. I had the privilege of visiting the New York City site, Occupy Wall Street, for 3 days in October. It happens to be in my old neighborhood. I grew up a half mile from the site, and it's nice to see the improvement in the old neighborhood. One of the things that struck me appropriate to this panel is that labor has a strong presence at Occupy Wall Street. There is, in fact, a labor website on labor involvement at the site. I saw workers everywhere. Labor's contributed funding, organizing, helped build the media technology that Judy pointed out is so prominent at the site. But one of the most striking things I saw in the 3 days I worked at the site was the sight of 3 workers who crossed over from the construction site of the new World Trade Center tower, the so-called Freedom Tower, on their lunch hour. 2 African Americans and an Hispanic American. They had their full construction gear on and an obviously makeshift sign, which they raised at the Occupy site. And it said simply, "Compassion is the new radicalism." I was moved by their presence, by their expression. And it drove home to me the importance of bringing together the movement for media democracy and the labor movement. And it's great to see labor's involvement in this movement. It's encouraging to me to see this. But whether or not this goes anywhere beyond the Occupy sites is up to us. And I hope we will all work together to advance media democracy, the labor movement, and the Occupy movement.